Hi, everybody. They've asked me to give you a brief presentation on prevailing wage, and I think the reason they asked me is that I was the legislative director for the Michigan State AFL-CIO for a number of years, and in 2016 was part of the whole signature challenge that transpired that ended up being in favor of labor unions and working families throughout Michigan. They did not have enough signatures. So we're now back to this whole thing again. I want to start briefly though with why we have prevailing wage. And I want to start with the DavisBacon Act, which some of you may be familiar with. But it started in a long time ago, but primarily in 1927. A contractor in Alabama hired people to work on a Veterans Bureau building. And the Congressman Bacon actually was prompted by concerns of the conditions for the workers and the fact that they had displaced local migrant workers and the competitive pressure that was being brought to bear on the community because of the substantially lower wages. So with that, he decided to push for and introduced the idea of the prevailing wage. And following that, shortly thereafter, when other states started recognizing the same kinds of problems, he was joined in his endeavor by Senator Davis from Pennsylvania. And the whole goal, and it was signed into law by President Hoover, was very simple, is that you need to, in certain industries, it is very difficult to secure adequate wages or work environments that are safe because of the nature of the jobs. And so if you're a UAW worker, you can have a collective bargaining agreement, and you can have wages, and you can have the requirement that there be a safe environment and no harassment or discrimination. But if you're someone that is a contractor or a builder or a carpenter, it is much harder to secure your rights and protections because it's a more fluid situation and you're not typically at one site all the time. Your sites are moving. And so, and in recognition that the substantially lower wages impacted the whole community. It doesn't just impact that particular carpenter or steel worker, but it impacts everybody. And the other thing was the ability to secure that they were qualified. Back then it was not necessarily certified, but he wanted people that had gone through an apprentice program, and that could only be secured if you had some sort of mechanism that triggered it. The DavisBacon Act started that whole system, and it was DavisBacon is primarily for any jobs that in the state of Michigan the federal government is giving $2,000 or more for to assist in the building of that particular entity. So University of Michigan has to adhere to DavisBacon. Hospitals often have to adhere to DavisBacon because if they're getting any federal dollars that exceed $2,000, they have an obligation per the government that you pay people adequate wages, that you ensure that it's a safe working environment, that there's no discrimination, all of those factors. And now we've had on occasion, and lately more so in the state of Michigan, abusers of that system, subcontractors and so forth. And the reason that can happen is if you start reducing funding for people who should be regulating and checking on these things, if it becomes that you've reduced the staff and you've reduced the overall budget, it becomes that much harder to go out and look for challenges that might be taking place. And that's kind of what we're facing in Michigan right now. But more importantly, in Michigan, we actually passed the prevailing wage law years ago. And again, all because of the federal stipulations and understandings, everything transferred and made sense to the state of Michigan. In so doing, the benefits I'd like to just go over with you briefly. The taxpayers recognize a huge benefit. And by the way, prevailing wage, taxpayers do not pay for prevailing wage. It is the contractor who is actually paying for the prevailing wage, or the University of Michigan through just that incremental addition of wages, just like any other profession. You know, if you hire a doctor, or if you hire someone to clean your kitchen, whatever it might be, depending, you come to an agreement with those wages and what the expectations of the job are, and then you go forward from there. So there's a misconception or a miscommunication out there right now that somehow taxpayers are indirectly paying for prevailing wage. I suppose if you want to say indirectly by the far that you're paying for everything, I suppose that's true, but the reality is that there's no taxpayer amount of dollars going directly over to help U of M to offset their cost on prevailing wage. Does that make sense? The other thing is that prevailing wage affords the opportunity, and the building trades have taken an incredible sense of purpose and pride. They have phenomenal trainings, and these apprenticeship programs typically end with the apprentice getting a job, and a really good job. But what that also means is that you have high-skilled laborers. You have people that you know are qualified to do the job. Now, when I was representing the AFL several years ago, and this passed, was legislation that if you wanted to do or hire someone to do work on the electricity in this room, they did not have to have certification. They did not really have to know what they were doing. The only restriction or criteria was they turn off the light switch. So now I want you to think about that, because right now in your schools, in your churches, in your restaurants, wherever you're going, the possibility is that there's some guy or gal that's decided that they want to make money, and they haven't been trained, they haven't been certified, and all they have to do is just turn off the light switch to start doing whatever they think is the right thing to do for that electrical system. Now, I don't know about you, that is a very frightening thought to me. That is your Republican legislature up in Lansing, and their good sense in thinking that that's a good idea. So this goes back again to prevailing wage. That doesn't happen under prevailing wage. There's a criteria that there is high-skilled labor there. Construction workers in the state typically contribute millions of dollars to the state in local taxes. Better wages mean a stronger and more fairly distributed tax base, and this helps policymakers balance budgets, fund education, and provide public services. It might even help fix the roads. But these are all things that are benefits of prevailing wage in our state. Typical construction workers not paid the prevailing wage are far more likely to be eligible for thousands of dollars in public assistance for food stamps, housing, and health care. So I don't know if you've heard, but a similar analogy is when Walmart comes into a neighborhood, all the little stores close, and then suddenly you have an increase in the need of people who need food stamps and social service benefits because Walmart's not paying enough. And so what happens is that all that workforce that might have been working at the local drugstore, the local clothing store, they now can't afford to subsist on the wage, and so they're kind of forced to go and use social services from all of us. Now, we feel that social services and that opportunity to have that is a good thing. But I think we can all agree that it shouldn't be because the corporation, or in the case of Walmart, or in the case of prevailing wage, there are businesses who have just decided not to pay enough and have decided that they want to pay less so that that group can get money from the government and from us, and that when they pay less, they get higher profits. So it's very simple. I mean, it's not a complicated formula. They want more money for profit, and this is how they do it. They cut the wages of the workers. Taxpayers don't save, they subsidize, and the increased reliance on public assistance increases taxpayer burdens. And, sometimes makes people, it has impacts, on your health, both mental and physical. It has it's not something that does not have unintended consequences, and in many cases, predictable consequences. Projects paying the prevailing wage attract quality, local, experienced construction workers who deliver high-quality work on time and on budget. And this is important to note because you'll have bids by the ABC contractors that come in typically much lower than your union contractors. And the only reason for that is that the union contractors are actually giving you the legitimate estimation of what they think it will cost. The ABC and other contractors will come in with a lower bid in hopes that they will get the job. And this is across the board, and I would say over 70% of those jobs, they end up, it takes longer and it costs more. So it's an interesting bidding process that when you hear like the government in Lansing has decided to go with a certain company, you should maybe consider looking into it. It might simply be that that company came in at a much lower bid, but then when you look at it 2 years later down the road, they actually ended up costing a lot more and it took a lot longer. Prevailing wage is part of the base of support of local training programs that provide middle-class career pathways. And again, I go back to the IBEW and all the building trades. If you ever want, I'm sure they would be delighted to take you through. They're excellent, excellent training programs. And these jobs, you know, pay like $75,000. So this isn't low-skilled, you know, low-wage endeavors. This is a very serious profession and needs to be recognized as such. And part of how we recognize professionals is by their wages. So prevailing wages is a very legitimate program to make sure that that protection's in place. Prevailing wage jobs support thousands of other non-construction jobs in healthcare, hospitality, and education. Again, because when you have wages that are good for them, the competitive job market will try to match those wages so that they can get good workers for them. So does anybody have any questions so far? How long did you want me to take?
As long as you want.
Oh, okay. Well, so one thing that I did want to share with you that happened 2 years ago, it was astounding because when the group that was going against prevailing wage and wanting to end it in the state, and I want to remind you of something. The reason they're doing a ballot proposal is because the legislature doesn't really want to vote on it. And the legislature doesn't want to vote on it in part because Governor Snyder said he was going to veto it. So you have this political game kind of going on, and then you have a group of people, primarily the DeVosses, Ron Weiser, who is one of our neighbors, and others who have decided that the people of Michigan don't really know what's best for them. And so since your legislator won't vote for it, and the governor has already said he's going to veto it, let's bypass the system of democracy and let's do this. Let's pay a lot of people to get signatures, get those signatures, and if we get enough, we can then present it to the legislature. If this legislature decides that they want to vote on it and take it up, they can. But if again, you know, it won't go to the governor because it doesn't have to at this point. But more than likely, they won't take it up and it still goes on the ballot. So this is a way for them to bypass all the protections that we have in our system of democracy. I want you to think about that for a minute. Because to me, that is really disturbing that this is something that's transpiring. And now for the second time. 2016 they did it, and over 60% of the signatures were designated as being invalid. Now this is after we have videos of them saying that this is really, you're signing something to increase minimum wage, and there were other things that they were suggesting you were signing. So I do ask all of you, if someone puts something in front of you and says please sign it, please read it, because they may or may not know what they're asking you to sign, but your signature's on it, and sometimes they might not be telling you all the accurate information. So there were, 60% of the signatures were considered invalid, and it was thrown out. The Board of Canvassers said no. Now they spent millions of dollars on the signature campaign, but they're still disturbed because you see, we still have prevailing wage in this state. And this disturbs them. I mean, Ron Weiser, he doesn't understand why he should have to pay prevailing wage costs for his apartment complexes, McKinley properties. And there's all these people that, why should we have to pay these low, unskilled peons when we need more money? I'm going to be, frank, I don't know what they need the money for. They have yachts, they have their second and third homes. I'm not sure what they need the money for. They feel compelled that they have to have this money, so they were compelled to do this second round trying to get prevailing wage on the ballot. Now, it is now in the second round with people counting the votes at the Secretary of State, or counting the signatures. I apologize for that. The second round counting the signatures. The first round, Secretary of State said they did not have enough and it was invalid. Then there was a protest and the Secretary of State said we'll do a larger group of test cases and we will do it again. Secretary of State is evaluating it now. It's possible by this Friday we'll have a determination of what the Secretary of State says, whether or not there's enough signatures to proceed or not. And at that point, if she or he deems that there's enough signatures, it then goes to the Board of Canvassers. The Board of Canvassers then has the right to decide whether or not they feel that there's enough signatures and the process has been legitimate and this should proceed on to the ballot. Now, if it should go to the ballot, the last time that this was in front of the people in the state of Michigan, over 72% voted resoundingly to keep prevailing wage. So this is not something that the people of Michigan, A, are concerned about, and B, want to change. And in fact, when they have an opportunity to vote on it, they support it overwhelmingly. So this is a very tiny group of people who for some reason have decided that the people in the building trades should not make livable, decent wages for themselves and for their families. And at this point, I kind of want to divert a little bit. If this goes on, if there's a desire to have this onto the ballot, more than likely it will go into the court system. And so very likely it will go through the court system and it will end up at the Michigan Supreme Court. And right now in the Michigan Supreme Court, it is dominated, just like every other part of the governmental branches in Michigan, by Republicans. And so the likelihood that there will be a favorable decision for working families is unlikely. So here I'm going to switch. We have an opportunity in November to change 2 seats on the Supreme Court. The first seat was appointed, I think, back in June of 2017. The second seat was appointed in November of 2017. So we're only talking 6-7 months ago. They were appointed by Governor Snyder. So I want you to think about this because these are 2 that will have justice in front of their names on the ballot, but they were never voted into office. They do not necessarily represent our points of view. And in fact, the woman was Governor Snyder's lawyer. So I would suggest to you, if you're looking at the character of an individual and who they hire to protect their interests, it's very likely that those 2 justices aren't in the same mind frame or philosophy as all of us are. We have a unique opportunity. We have 2 excellent candidates that are running. Sam Bergen's.
You gotta learn that name.
I just think he should change his name to Kelly. I really do. So we have Sam, who's excellent. He's a U of M professor. He's superb. We also have, now this is the one I know because it's Irish, Megan Kathleen Kavanaugh, whose father was the justice on the court for over 3 decades, but she, in her own right, has been an incredible appellate court judge, lawyer, who understands the law and knows what to do with bad law to make it good law. So we are in a unique position to get these 2 people voted onto the court so that when things like the prevailing wage and other issues come up in front of the court, we have a chance to have our ideas and our philosophies considered in the whole frame of the legal argument. So I know I digress, except that the biggest challenge for all of us, if we don't win on the signatures, it's very likely it will be on the ballot. And what we know, if the truth is told, then people in Michigan will vote it down to get rid of it. But very likely it's gonna get confused, it's going to be something that people won't understand, and so we don't know what will happen. But I will tell you.
Just interject, if you don't
Yeah.
mind. The canvassing effort that we are starting in May, we're going to focus on Supreme Court candidates because we want to give them, it's all name recognition and who, knowing people knowing who to vote for. So
That's great.
We are gonna push on that, and we'll also have poll reader cards like we did last time.
That's excellent. And it's not, and you all know this, but it's not just that you have to remember their two names. And actually at this point, just know that if it's a justice in front of the name, you don't want them. Snyder likes them, you don't want them. You want the two that don't have that designation. But it's also the fact that if you vote straight ticket, which is a great thing to do.
Yeah.
Right.
But you have not voted for the nonpartisan section of the ballot. And it's not just the justices and the judges, it's also like all your ballot proposals. So I don't know if you've ever did this, but I still remember this. I was in grade school, I thought I did really well on a test, handed it in, and as I'm walking out with someone, they said, so how did you do your essay on the back? I never flipped it over. And I have, to this day, a sick feeling about it. That's kind of the same thing, isn't it? You think you did everything, you're proud of yourself, you get the sticker, I voted, we're gonna be great here, and then suddenly someone says, well, who'd you vote for when it came to the Supreme Court? I don't know if it's gonna be on the back, but it's not gonna be part of that straight ticket voting. So that's the other message that we have to get out.
Fran, Robin Tutson Stevenson said back in 2016, no, actually it wasn't her. Anyway, somebody said,
Deputy Thomas, I think, if I remember correctly.
yeah. Judge Thomas did say, start on the back at the bottom.
Yeah,
Because you're not going to forget to vote for the top of the ticket. So start on the back of at the bottom and then work your way the other way, and that way you won't forget.
And that is a great idea. The only challenge, and I don't think it will happen this time, there are some times that where you might have a long ballot, there might be other areas in the state that don't. So that's the additional challenge with trying to get people to, just make sure you do the whole test. Just make sure. But I know, she's great, and that was great. And here's the other thing, if you want to think about it, for both Bag and Stoss, is that right?
You got it.
Yay. And Kavanaugh, if there's a way, I worked on the Diane Hathaway campaign. And we did vote all the way for Hathaway. I mean, those things help. So if anybody comes up with anything like that, please let me know. That would be great news. But
In the bag with Bag and Stoss.
I was kind of thinking, don't stop till Bag and Stoss.
I
don't
like
know. You're
green
trying
eggs
to.
and ham.
What?
I like
I think
green eggs.
you like green eggs and ham. I like them, Sam, I am.
Okay, then what about Kavanaugh? Here's the other thing. If you do two, we'll have a majority for the first time in close to 2 decades.
Yeah. Well, for those of us who grew up or lived in the Chelsea area, Kavanaugh Lake.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Come out
Yeah.
for Kavanaugh.
Come
Yeah.
on, Kavanaugh.
Yes,
There
sir.
you go.
Yeah.
I got prevailing wage might show up in the Supreme Court, how would that happen?
Well, it's whoever wins on the signature thing is going to argue it. And
The other
they're
person.
going to take it all the way to the court, and typically it will end up at the Supreme Court. Now, the Supreme Court in Michigan may say no, they won't hear it.
The signatures don't count enough.
Yeah, I mean, there's going to be a dispute.
Why would the Democrats dispute it?
It wouldn't be us. It would, if, let's say they say that the signatures don't count, then it's going to be the other group who is, again, spent millions of dollars.
But if they do say there are enough signatures, is it likely that the Democrats might argue that?
It's possible. I mean, the other problem here, and if you're in labor, you know this, they pass laws, and I've done a lot of presentations where I'll say this is not constitutional, and everyone looks at me like, well, how can that be? They just passed it up in the legislature. Well, they don't really care if it's constitutional, because we then are beholden to do the judicial process, hire the lawyers, which are costly, and to go through that whole process through the court. So I don't know. I don't know if, there's limited resources for the Democrats and labor unions and stuff, whether they're going to choose, to do that, or educate the voters? I don't know. I mean, the other question is how is it going to be listed on the ballot? Will it be, do you want to get rid of prevailing wage? I mean, will it be a yes or
Right,
no question on the ballot?
You know it won't be.
Yeah.
Fran, one of the things we were talking about, and it finally just came back into my head for our potentially combined May meeting, is a judicial forum.
Yeah.
To have candidates for all of the judicials that are open. So we were going to start working on trying to get them together for a May meeting, which
Yeah.
would be, I think it's like around May 20th or something like that.
And that would be great, actually, to highlight what you guys are doing as
Right.
far as the canvassing.
Right.
That would be great. Yes, sir.
I have a question. If and maybe I don't understand this correctly, so please correct me if I don't. If they determine they do have enough signatures and the state ledge wants to go ahead and act on it, they then don't need to get Governor
Correct.
Snyder's signature. So this, in some ways, could be an end around against Governor Snyder's opposition
And the people of Michigan.
and the people of
Yeah,
Michigan, yes.
you're absolutely correct. The pressure that I believe the prevailing wage groups such as the building trades has been doing is to particularly target those that are in targeted seats, that are Republicans, and hopefully they won't vote for it. And part of the pressure that they did 2 years ago with the House was to pressure the House enough that they did not want to discuss it. That we had gotten them to a point that they did not want it on the floor. So if it gets on the floor, somebody might call for the question and they don't want a record of it. Because you have the people who are paying you a lot of money to vote for it, you know, and then you have all the labor unions and families who are saying, what are you doing to us? So it's a complicated, you're absolutely right. If the legislature decides to take it up and they vote in favor of it, it's over.
Because of the petition, it
Because somebody bought enough signatures.
Right.
I'm sorry, this is somewhat slanted.
but
yeah,
because of the petition, they would
Yeah.
not need the governor's signature.
yeah, well, yes,
Which
correct.
is what gets us into this whole,
Yeah, and that's why they're
Anyway.
doing it, because Governor Snyder came out early on and said he would veto prevailing wage if there was any attempt to get rid of it. And so that's why they did it 2 years ago, and that's why they're doing it again. And, you know, to your point, if I were them, this looks like it could be a difficult year for many of them. So if they are true believers in getting rid of prevailing wage, this would be the year that they would pull all stops out to do whatever they could to get it, you know, into law and off the books.
Try to do whatever damage they can do
right,
Yeah,
while they're
Yeah.
on life support.
well, yeah, you know, I mean, the other thing is that it will certainly rear its ugly head during the lame duck session. You know, after the election, where I hope there's been a blue wave because of all the buttons and everything.
That'll be the
You know, then they'll
second.
just try to do whatever they can then. But yeah, it's gonna be a long year.
yes it is.
Any other questions? Sorry that I went off on the Supreme Court, it is a passion of mine.
Supreme
Yes,
Court, if it is on the back of the ballot,
not always, yeah,
flip the court.
flip the court.
Mm-hmm.
Way to go,
Yes.
Dirk.
Flip the ballot, flip the court.
Yes.
We like that.
What is your first name?
Dirk.
Dirk, flip the ballot, ooh, I like that. That's good, that's good.
Mm-hmm.
All right, very good.
My,
We'll make some buttons.
Yeah.
Will you? And that's perfect, with a little gavel.
Oh, I like that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's great. I'm gonna see how that floats with everybody. I think that's good. I know I'll get the. So if you're a lawyer in the room, please forgive me. Am I still being taped? No, it's okay. I love lawyers. I have 2 brothers that are lawyers, and I have a great affinity for them. I have cousins and uncles that were judges, but when you're dealing with them, they always get into the minutia of, well, that's good, but what about the ballots that you can't, there's no flipping? Well, wait a minute, at the end of the day, they'll still turn it over, and they'll still go back and make sure they did everything. So the point is made.
Mhm.
But yeah, now I'm just thinking, I'm gonna give you a call, Dirk, so that you can talk to them about why it's a good.
Engineers and lawyers get along great, so.
Yeah, no, that's a great idea, I like that, so I'll try it and see what, if it happens, we can't give you any money, but we'll invite you to to when they get signed,
Sworn in.
sworn in, thank you. That's great, thank you. Anybody else? Thank you very much, you guys, and have a good night.
Thanks, Fran.
Ooh.